Hi, my name is David Buckle. I'm the new Head of Member Engagement at Nominet. Welcome to this video where you'll get to meet the candidates for our upcoming non-executive direct elections. This year there are 2 positions available on the board and 6 candidates. We'll be asking each candidate the same questions which have been posed by our members. We've asked the questions verbatim and the candidates have not seen the questions in advance. We start with each candidate introducing themselves, and we hope you enjoy it.
So my name is Ashley Lavalle. I'm the Director of Domains at 2 Cows. I've been with 2 Cows via EPAC Domain Services, which is our German registrar, since 2013. And I actually came to 2 Cows from Mark Monitor. So I've been in the domain industry for a bit over 10 years now. The reason that I'm here is because, first of all, I have a real passion for CCTLD registries in particular, and for the internet infrastructure, and I really want to see it run well and in a way that we can all be proud of. That's the reason that I supported the EGM, and this all informs my vision for Nominet and the reason that I'm running. I'd like to see Nominet be run as cost efficiently as possible, focused on its core internet infrastructure purpose, and its not-for-profit purpose, meaning that it focuses on its public benefit. I've been, like I mentioned, working with CCTLD registries for a long time on technical, operational, and policy issues. So I understand the issues that Nominet faces, and I also have a really strong business background. I completed an MBA in 2019, and I work at 2 Cows in the pricing and operational piece of the domains business. So with all of that said, I want to use my business background, my strong understanding of how a business needs to be operated and the domain industry to be able to cement the changes that we've been able to bring about through the EGM and make sure that those changes are implemented long-term and that members can trust that these changes are going to be permanent.
Hello, I'm David Thornton. I'm the current incumbent candidate for the Nominet non-executive election in 2021. I've sat on the board for 2 terms, 6 years in total. I'm looking to run for a 3rd term, a final term, and I represent sort of the secondary market area. I have experience across the board, having sat on the Nominet board for 6 years. I have a good understanding of the industry, and I feel a 3rd term would be a good idea in the current circumstances.
Hi, my name is Jim Davies, and I'm applying to be a Nominet director because I believe that Nominet is currently at a crossroads in its history, and this is possibly one of the most important Nominet director elections that there has ever been. The EGM, which succeeded following the public benefit platform that I support, looks to move Nominet back to its original founding principles, where it is operating as a not-for-profit UK domain name registry. And I believe that requires significant change within Nominet, including in its constitution. And my experience as a lawyer will assist in bringing that through and pushing it through so that the members are able to decide what direction they want Nominet to go in. I have previous experience on the Nominet board, and that experience was consistent with the current platform in terms of directing Nominet back towards its core principles. So if you believe in that, please vote for me and the other public benefit candidates for this election. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dr. Liz Williams. I'm standing for the board because I have extensive subject matter expertise in the domain name industry, particularly in the registry business. I have been working internationally since 1999 in the industry, both on the registry and registrar side. I've got extensive commercial experience in the industry, backed with also extensive experience in the telecoms industry, so that network integration, network businesses, the domain name systems, technical architecture is the heart of what I've been doing for a very long time. The difference between me and the other candidates is I don't have any existing commercial or other relationships with Nominet members. So those 2,500 members can expect from me, bringing my expertise as a board director, to really committing to settling the way in which the proposed strategy, which the CEO has put in place and is being consulted upon. And the strength that I bring to that is that I'm already an appointed board director. I focus on two particular areas which happen to be my passion. The first of those is education, and I'm a appointed trustee of City University's Student Union. And I'm also serve on the board of my Dorset Local Economic Partnership. I've just been appointed to the main board after serving on the Strategic Infrastructure Committee. That is in tandem with my work over many, many years in risk mitigation, in serving on boards of advocacy agencies like, for example, I was a very early director on the .au domain administration when .outer was set up. And very similar to the situation with Nominet, Outer has gone through its own development and evolution, particularly around the way in which stakeholders are engaged and which members are listened to, but also in the way in which the organisation is run appropriately and correctly. The secondary part of my career has been about, because I've reached a certain point of maturity in my career, I now act as an expert witness in international arbitrations, and I focus particularly on privacy advocacy, network security, and on domain name system resilience.
I'm Simon Blackler. I run a internet services company called Crystal. I was heavily involved, well, I started the public benefit campaign to try and restore Nominet's non-profit purpose. And as a result of the changes that have come about in the board, I'm interested in seeing through what we started.
My name's Stephen Yarrow. I'm 63 years old. I've been in IT since 1996. Previous to that, I worked in broadcasting. Started with my first domain name, I think in 97, control about 200 domains. And I've been with Nominet, I think about 20 odd years now. And I'm just I did actually apply previously for the UK RAC, but I didn't quite get there. I'm interested in becoming more involved in Nominet because of I work from home, I'm semi-retired, and I've got lots of time in my hands. I want to do something useful that I find interesting.
Thank you all for that introduction. And so to our first question. Is Nominet a not-for-profit? And if so, should it return to using this phrase to describe the organisation as it did for 20 years since inception?
I believe Nominet is a not-for-profit in the respect that it doesn't redistribute its profit to its members because it's not legally able to do that. As regards using that phrase, I think there's no problem using the phrase if who you're using it with fully understands that it means what I've just said. However, Nominet does make profit, it just doesn't redistribute it. And that's what people possibly do not always understand. As regards using the phrase, I have no problem using the phrase as long as it's understood, but I prefer the idea that it's explained to people when the phrase is used so they fully understand what not-for-profit means in the context of Nominet, and that there's currently no shareholders and we can't redistribute the funds, so the profit to our members. Thank you.
I believe Nominet, being a company limited by guarantee and formed specifically for the purpose of preventing anyone from profiting from it, is and should always have been a not-for-profit company. I believe that passionately, that its role is one of governance of the .uk domain space, and in that context, it should be specifically and explicitly not-for-profit, which is a term that has meaning, rather than following, as it has done in the recent past, what I would refer to as effectively marketing slogans like profit for purpose, which actually don't mean anything, and it's engaged in foolish frolics in the commercial space. It should return to its original governing purpose as a not-for-profit.
That's a very interesting question, and I think that we should be very careful about our definitions. It is clear that Nominet has been extremely successful as a profit with a purpose organisation and has acquired extensive balance sheet resources which can and should be used for public benefit. I think it's unwise for us to get caught up in an historical reanalysis of precise terms like that, because that requires us to really think seriously about the Constitution. It requires us to think really clearly, though, in much more importance, is to make sure that we all have a common understanding of, in an evolutionary phase of the organisation, that we move forward. It is easy to get stuck on historical analysis. It's easy to not learn from things that might necessarily not have gone as well as they could have. But I think we're at an inflection point now with Nominet as an operation and with the board to think clearly about what the manifestation is of managing our profit with a purpose. And it's very clear that the new board chairman, Andy Green, has a very clear vision about how that might be implemented. I have listened very carefully to his statements. I've listened very carefully to the implementation of, and I admire this enormously, the Waite's principles for public governance and the principles around governance are put at the heart of the responsibilities of directors, the success of the organisation. So it is worthy work to have another go and to have another look at that terminology. But I'd hate us to get caught up into it when we're at now a point where we need to move forward. And, you know, as I said in my introduction, I have been involved in the industry for a very, very long time, since 1999. My master's dissertation from 1995 was about internet regulation. My PhD is in cybersecurity and network security. And there is no doubt that we have, as an industry, moved on. And we need to demonstrate that maturity in the way in which we conduct discussions with each other.
Yes, and yes, Nominet is a not-for-profit. It was founded as a not-for-profit, and it shouldn't just return to using that phrase. It should return to embodying that mantra and approach to everything it does. Nominet occupies a special monopoly in its ability to control and sell .uk domain names, and that privileged position requires really that it is not for profit. Otherwise, you have a very attractive treasure that will encourage undesirable behaviour. So yes, I think that Nominet is a not for profit. It should return to using that phrase, and it should operate true to that origin.
Right, as I understand it, when I first joined Nominet, it was described to me as a not-for-profit organisation. But I believe, from what I've heard, this has changed over the years. But I don't know, obviously, what's happening to the money that's being made. But hopefully, it's being reinvested in domain names and how they're kept secure, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say, yes, it is a not-for-profit in the sense that Nominet is a private company with, what was it, guarantee. So it's because it doesn't pay dividends out to members, it is a not-for-profit organization. And I think, you know, we see the reasons that led up to the EGM was that Nominet lost sight of this purpose. So the board was trying to exercise a corporate strategy that didn't fit that not-for-profit purpose. It didn't commit to stakeholder engagement. It didn't have accountability in its processes, and it didn't engage members. So, you know, if you look at the Nominet website now, you wouldn't easily know that it's a not-for-profit organization, and you wouldn't easily find that connection back to this public or private company with guarantee. So I think that we can easily say, yes, Nominet is a not-for-profit organization. That should be the core purpose and the core driver of its strategy and its corporate strategy. And this is something that I think members can be really proud of, and Nominet should be really clear about in its website, its marketing, and its decision making.
And now the second question. Now here we have two questions that are quite similar. So I'm going to ask both questions at once, and then I'll ask for your answer to each one, and you'll have a chance to answer each question individually. So the two questions are, it's possible that within your term, governance changes could be made. What governance changes do you think should be made or avoided? And the second question, what governance changes do you think Nominet should make to the board from 2022? So the first question, it's possible that within your term, governance changes could be made. What governance changes do you think should be made or avoided?
I believe that governance changes should be made, or at least that they should be put to the members at a general meeting, having engaged in a meaningful consultation with members. Nominet has, over a period of time from roughly 2006 onwards, engaged in governance changes almost by stealth at times towards the commercial space. I think it's time for the members to consider whether or not that is the direction they want Nominet to go in. I do not believe it is. I think Nominet should return to its not-for-profit founding principles. And in order to do that, and the only way to do that is not, whilst I welcome this statement largely from the chair, the interim statement, it is an interim statement. And I think it would be unwise to wait 3 years before engaging in a proper consultation and genuine governance changes, if that's what members want, because it is only that that will protect the vision of Nominet that the membership wishes to pursue.
So with the first one, what governance changes should be made? And I think that that is a very clear statement from the chair, and there's a very clear indication that the chair wants to take the governance of the organisation in a tangentially different direction. The review of the Waite's Principles of Public Life, if you looked at them in detail, you would see there's a very strong focus on correctness. And correctness for me is when you think about a membership organisation, and this is a question that was asked for all the candidates about fairness. It's really difficult in an organisation of 2,500 members to make sure that you have to get a one-size-fits-all response to those questions. It's not possible. The members come from a very diverse range of size of organisation, of whether they're listed companies or whether they're small SMEs in my local hometown. And we cannot expect a one-size-fits-all membership response. And that's a big challenge for our membership engagement and our stakeholder engagement. Our members are not the only stakeholders that we need to engage with. It is very clear from a public policy perspective that Nominet has a central role to play in the stable running of critical infrastructure for the United Kingdom. And there is no doubt that that requires very specific governance in its broadest term. We need to be extremely careful of what we do and how we supply services to a wide array of not only domain name owners, but also central government functions. So governance for me is certainly more, the focus that I would have on it is independence and objectivity. There has been a time of turmoil and legitimate reflection and legitimate questioning around the maturity of the organisation, and that's correct. But I'd really like us to focus on the operationalising of the Waite's Principles of governance, because they matter. They matter when there's large sums of money at stake. They matter when we care about public benefit, and they matter when we care about public interest.
I think that Nominet should be careful with making changes to governance, particularly with regards to membership. I believe that Nominet's greatest strength is its members, and a change to the membership structure should be avoided. I think that there are valid concerns about any number of governance issues, such as weighted voting, what Nominet should be involved in and what it shouldn't be involved in. But I don't think that decoupling membership from governance is something that I would support.
In my mind, I think now that the UK's left the EU, we should relax the GDPR regulations and make it possible for people to go onto the WHOIS and find out who exactly owns the domain name, so they can complete due diligence before they do business with a company and find exactly who they're dealing with. Now you can't do that. And I had a situation with my wife before we were married where she got conned by someone because I got enough information for the WHOIS. I found the person responsible and I got a full refund. But now that's just not possible. And that needs to be changed very quickly.
So I expect that governance changes will be made. within the term. Andy Green recently committed to implementing, for example, the Waits principles of governance. And after taking some time to read through those principles and understand the background of those principles and what they're meant to accomplish, I would like to see those principles implemented in the everyday decision making of the board, as well as the reporting functions from the board. So the Waits principles require purpose and leadership. That means you have to apply your understanding of the purpose and how the decision completes that purpose, and then explain that on a regular basis. Make sure that the board's composition ensures a range of competencies, and also ensures that you have people on the board who bring an understanding of the business, along with people on the board who are willing to challenge the thinking. We don't want to have an echo chamber on the board. The Waits principles also look at stakeholder relationships and engagement, and I'd really like to see the board be much more clear about how it intends to engage with members and stakeholders, and also be much more clear about how well it thinks it's performing against its goals. So that means reporting on the progress made in stakeholder engagement and member engagement. So I think the Waits principles are going to be really important in making sure we don't go back to the way things were before March. I think it's only effective if it's more than lip service. And on the board, I'd like to make sure it's more than lip service. So that means making sure that we implement a lot of transparency and a lot of documentation, goal setting, and clear communication in how those principles are making sure that Nominet is working towards its core purpose and its mission. That means UK registry and public benefit mission.
So obviously I've sat on the board for 6 years and I was elected twice. I've never lost an election. So I have a good idea, I feel, of how things might be changed in the future and how I feel they should. I've written about it actually today at davidthornton.uk, so you can read my opinions there. I'd like to see two things though. I'd like to see a change to an appointed board, which is a traditional way that boards operate in the UK. And I'd like to see an expansion of the appointed directors from 4 to 5. So you would see 5 appointed directors from inside the industry rather than 4 elected ones as we currently do. I'd also like to consider how the link between the governance and the discount is. So at the moment, to be discounted on domains, you need to be a Nominet member, and to enjoy the cheaper prices. I feel that in actually fact, it's not sensible linking the two together anymore. I think we should see separation between governance and registrar business. But if you want to do both, you can. If you want to do one or the other, you can. But they should be distinctly separate, so people understand the full difference and are not forced to do both.
And the second question in that pair, what governance changes do you think Nominet should make to the board from 2022?
The changes in 2022, which I think are really important, is some significant work around diversity and inclusion. The board is very top heavy with one particular gender. That doesn't reflect the way in which a good board should run. It certainly doesn't reflect our stakeholder community. And I think we need to do some serious work on the way in which we could implement changes to diversity across the board, whether that is thinking about disability and inclusion, whether it's thinking about gender inclusion, whether it's thinking about engagement of directors that bring to the board some different independent and objective focus. With respect to the question you asked me before around, the Constitution in terms of not-for-profit and profit for a purpose, I think that is best left alone for the moment, because we have a lot to get on with in implementing a strategy and a governance strategy with the work that will need to be done with a new CEO. And I think one of the better ways for us to focus on introductions for governance is to, again, focus on steady state, focus on best practice, focus on adjacent organisations like Nominet, and there are many of organisations like Nominet that are providing registry services, which is at the heart of their business, and watching very carefully about how they are run, whether they're publicly listed companies or not actually doesn't matter. But what I really want to focus on is the way in which we speak to members. Do we need a difference in the way we speak to members. How do we engage with stakeholders? And what weight do we apportion to the input from stakeholders? In my experience of working for more than 20 years in the ICANN multi-stakeholder model, the bottom-up consensus-driven model, it's really important to listen. And that's not a governance change, that's an attitude change. And I think being open and being humble on both sides of a conversation is actually the key governance thing that I think in 2022, which is just a short time away, the best thing for Nominet to focus on.
I would like to see the size of the board reduced. At the moment, there are 12 seats available, 4 member elected, 4 appointed, of which one is the chair, and 4 executive. A 12-strong board is on the large side for a company of Nominet's size, and I would like to see the size of that board reduced. I think that the number of member elected net is proportional and should be preserved, but I think there could be less executive seats and possibly less appointed seats.
I think that they should look at how many board members there are and what actually each board member does to make sure that the workload is equally spread out and there's enough work for everybody and no one sort of sitting around doing nothing and getting paid for it.
So, I think it's a difficult time to do massive governance change outside of making sure that we're implementing the weights principles and making sure that we're implementing those in very tangible and documented and transparent manners. Right now, I think is the time to win back member trust with the board. And I think it's also time to try to build trust within the membership between the large, medium, and smaller members. Before we've been able to build back some of the trust that has been lost over the last few years and demonstrate that the board is going to be accountable, I think it's too early to be making large governance changes. I think it's also important to note that a lot of governance changes that have a real impact require a really high threshold of members to approve that. So I wouldn't want to see the board trying to make changes that wouldn't have a large support from the membership. And so other than the weights principles, I don't think the board should be making massive governance changes. And I don't think even if they tried, they'd be successful.
Again, please feel free to read my website at davidthornton.uk, where I've written extensively about governance changes that I feel might be appropriate. I would like to see an appointed board with an expansion of the number of board members from inside the domain industry from 4 to 5. And the expansion would mean that different categories of registrars were represented more fairly on the board. And we didn't have the issue where we lose good skills from the board because, for example, someone might stand for re-election after 3 years, but be defeated because they just weren't so good at campaigning. Secondly, I'd like to see separation of the member discount from governance. So if you want to be a registrar and you want to register domain names and you want the discounted price, you can do that. You do not need to be a Nominet member and bother yourself with governance if that's something you're not really interested in. Likewise, I'd like to see governance stand on its own. There needs to be some kind of way of weighting governance, and that's the issue right now, because domain names are kind of the token that suggest what rights, what voting rights you have. I don't see changing that, because I do feel that if you've got domains, you have some, you should have some sort of relevance to the governance, but there needs to be some separation from the registrar side and the governance side, and that's what I'd like to work on.
This is a more nuanced question in my mind. The first thing I would say is that I do not support, as some other candidates appear to do, some form of increased vetting of the members' choices of their elected members. Other than that an applicant is legitimately able to hold the role of a director, the decision-making process, in my view, should very much be with the membership and not with the executive or others within Nominet. So I would leave alone the way that elected members are chosen by the membership. And that's not to say, of course, that the members should choose unwisely, and I would trust them not to do so. In terms of the constitution of the current board, I believe that anyone who is on the current board who opposed the EGM in March and were unsuccessful in doing so should demonstrate to the members a genuine change in their position. By doing so, they should put themselves up for reappointment at the earliest opportunity, which is this AGM. After that, I think the board needs to review the type of, if the company is changing its direction from the previous for-profit approach that was being pursued, then I think that does need, and Andy Green is a positive step in that direction, a different type of person on the board. But in terms of the constitution of the board, I don't believe that at the moment that is the most urgent change that the company faces in terms of numbers.
Our third question, one candidate has suggested that the board should be all appointed. Is this something you would like to see in future?
No, is the short answer. Making everybody appointed would further erode member influence and input in the board and in the governance of Nominet, and I think that would be a major loss. It's clear that the membership are passionate and invested in Nominet and what Nominet does, as evidenced by the EGM, and to remove the member elected NEDs wouldn't improve things. In fact, it would probably make things worse. I think that there are questions about the caliber and quality of individuals that have been attracted to apply in the past, and part of this question might be to do with remuneration. Certainly there could be more thorough screening of member elected NEDs, but I think that they should be kept, and I wouldn't support a motion to replace them with appointed NEDs. No.
Difficult question, really. Wherever I've worked in various large organisations, board members have been elected. So yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I think the days of jobs for life are gone. I mean, I did have a job for life, and then along came a change in government and took the job away. So yeah, it does happen sometimes. So I think elections are quite important on a sort of semi-regular basis, maybe once every 5 years or so.
I think that's a really easy thing to answer. No. I think the point of having appointed members and elected members is to go back to what I said before, is to ensure that you have a range of backgrounds, of skills, and opinions on the board. You don't want to have a monolithic board. You don't want to have an echo chamber. You don't want to have groupthink. And so by having elected members, you first of all give members the ability to impact the board, to impact the decision and the trajectory of the organization, and to really influence change. By having appointed members, you're allowing people from outside the industry, from outside of the membership, to come in and challenge the board and challenge the CEO and make sure that we're really living up to the core purpose and mission of the organization. So I think it would be a fatal decision to move towards a fully appointed board.
Yes, I would, because that candidate is certainly me. I've suggested that, and I've written about it on davidthornton.uk, and you can read more about it. I would certainly like to see an all-appointed board, because that's what most sensible companies in the UK have. And I've explained why extensively on my site. So please visit davidthornton.uk if you're interested to know more.
No. I do not think it's a good idea. I think it is important that the members have direct input into the constitution of the board, and that the company trusts the members to make sensible choices. The candidates, as indeed in this election, are not limited to being members in order to be elected. So it's perfectly possible to attract people from either within or without the membership for the members to decide. And the membership is a broad church and in many respects both sophisticated and has a deep knowledge of the domain name space, and they should be trusted with this role. So no, I do not agree with effectively removing elected members or having any more control over them, or an increased number of appointed directors compared to elected directors.
I think the answer to that question is no, not because I don't think it's a good idea in other environments, but an all appointed board would require, at the moment, and speaking about the previous question you asked me about governance changes, that would require extensive rethinking around the Constitution, the Articles of Association, the purpose of the organisation, and, for example, the appointment of a nominations committee. It would also, I think, involve us in, it might be a good result in terms of quality, but I think that we can achieve quality outcomes for our board directors, which focus on behaviour, focus on qualification, focus on willingness to listen as a personality type that really needs to be focused on, in this particular example. I would certainly think that it is a worthy question to ask members, but at the time when members are not actually trusting the organisation very greatly, and when we're going through still, unfortunately, a period of relative turmoil, I would suggest that that's a question that could be asked at our next strategic review. It's not to say that you wouldn't close off from the question, but I think that it is wise for us to continue to have opportunities for members to be a part of the board and to feel like they have a say in the decisions that are made. That does not mean, though, that elected board members act in any other way other than in the interest of the company itself. No board director that is appointed in this round can promise to any of the other members that they'll be able to deliver a certain kind of outcome. And if they do promise that, then it's not correct. So I would love to hear that question brought up from members in the next strategic review. And then if we can think about that clearly and carefully and we can apply best practice principles to it, we should answer that question carefully.
Do you think weighted voting is fit for purpose?
I think when you vote for a change or some new policy, you should really be looking at maybe 75% before you consider that change.
Yeah, so I think voting that goes in any extreme is not fit for purpose. I think the purpose of voting is to ensure that members have a strong voice in the direction of the organization, and that the voting structure is as fair as possible. So I think, on one side of the extremes, you might have straight votes where it's just according to the number of domains under management. That's not fair to smaller members who would completely lose their voice. On the other hand, you could have voting that is one member, one vote. I think that doesn't account for the skin in the game that members may have. So I think weighted voting is an attempt to create some sort of fairness and balance in the voting process. I think we need to identify what the concerns are in the membership. To me, from what I've heard, there's a concern with minority member representation, and I think that's something we can address, but we need to understand the problem. We need to encourage member engagement in solving that problem, and I think we need to look for different voting structures that might help solve that problem, or even consider changing the percentage of equal and weighted votes within the current voting structure. Like I answered with the governance question, I don't think now is the time to make that kind of a change. That kind of change would require a really high percentage of members to support it. I wouldn't be happy to see any sort of change that didn't have really strong support from across the membership. So first, let's work on making sure that all members can fully engage and that we're removing any barriers to engagement and building back that trust between the board and the members and amongst members.
I think weighted voting is predominantly fit for purpose, although the issue we have right now is there's a cap at 3%. So no member who votes can have more than 3% of the turnout of any election for non-executive directors, or 10% on other types of resolutions. And it may be the case that some of the members who have some of the most domains under management are not most fairly represented at the moment because of that cap. And I think that's something that is cause for concern, because after all, certain registrars do contribute the majority of the registry income because they manage the majority of the domain names. So it's important that they are fairly represented. I certainly don't support going to one member, one vote. It just doesn't make sense in the context of how we are and how businesses who have domains provide income to Nominet. It certainly needs some kind of consideration. Thank you.
Weighted voting for a company limited by guarantee is very unusual. The setup of a company limited by guarantee, which is what Nominet is almost universally one member, one vote. Indeed, one of the first things that I would institute if I'm appointed to the board is an investigation by senior counsel as to whether or not weighted voting is indeed legal. There are significant, there are parts of the Companies Act, in particular Section 5, which suggests that it is not legal, in which case the debate on whether or not it's appropriate or how to amend it, frankly, becomes academic. If it isn't right in law, then it needs to be changed and done away with. If it is lawful, then again, there is a debate as to whether or not each member who makes the same contribution in terms of membership fees should get the same weight of voting. And I think there is a serious question as to whether or not members who are effectively given increased power within the company because of their commercial activities should have that additional power. However, I can see that they do contribute more to the turnover of the business. And so if it is lawful, then I can see the force of their position as well. So it's something I think that should be taken to the membership, discussed and considered, and all points of views addressed and taken in. But the first question is weighted voting legal? I'm not sure. We should find out.
In the way in which we have currently got a construction of the way in which members can vote, I think weighted voting is not helpful. It closes, and the reason why it's not helpful is twofold. Firstly, it closes down conversation. And I'm a believer that we need to listen to a small member who runs a small business in, I don't know, Northern Scotland, or a large business like BT that's a publicly listed company. And it is reasonable for us to expect any size member to be able to articulate their position, to be able to evidence their position, to be able to garner support for their position. And I just don't think that weighted voting enables us to do that. There is, though, the alternative answer to the question that says perhaps in the construction of a board in the future, that there may be an advisory board kind of layer that could reflect a weighted voting approach to the way in which we receive advice to the main board from members based on size, status, activity, business activity. I'd be very hesitant, though, to instantly go into that discussion right at the moment now, when we need to settle the governance of the board and when we need to settle the operations of the board, and we need to support the operational excellence of the executive staff in an environment which is not disturbed by arguments about I'm bigger than you and you're not listening to me because I'm small. Those arguments are unhelpful at this juncture of Nominet's evolution.
That's an excellent question. I think that weighted voting is an attempt to make membership representation fair. I think weighted voting is complex. In fact, Nominet themselves have messed up the voting rights twice in the last couple of years, and therefore, it's quite hard. It's quite hard to understand. So there's an argument there that it should be looked at and seen if it can be simplified. I think that the current system probably, on balance, isn't particularly good at making sure that all of the members have representation. If we've got 2,500 members, it only takes 17 or so large members who can unilaterally decide what happens or what doesn't. And this gets even worse when it becomes down to passing special resolutions, which require 90% of the vote, because the larger members are capped to 10%. So effectively, 2 of them can prevent any changes happening. Clearly, if you've got more domain names under management, you might feel like you should have more of a say. But with 2,500 members and only 10 or 15 of them being able to decide everything that happens, we don't have proper representation. I think one member, one vote might be too much in one direction, because, or more accurately, turkeys won't vote for Christmas. So one member, one vote is unlikely to get anywhere. But a 3% cap on weighted voting and a weighted voting mechanism that's complicated is also not good. Perhaps getting down to something like 1% cap would be good.
Our next question relates to public benefit. The board has committed to a new public benefit board subcommittee, including both elected and appointed non-executive directors with input from experienced external advisors. Would you like to see this go further with the setting up of a Nominet charity with trustees?
So first of all, I would like to say that I'm really excited about the commitment of the board with the £50 million spend and then the additional per yearly spend. That is a real change, and I think it's something that we can consider a big win from the EGM. I'm open to looking at a charity with trustees, but I think my gut reaction is I don't want to create additional overhead that takes money away from the actual public benefit causes that we want to support. So I think that is one option that's on the table. I think a committee on the board might be a lower overhead option, but that has to be something that has engendered trust with members. I think if we're going to, whatever we move forward with, we need to identify the public benefit goals that Nominet wants to support, and we need to have really clear objectives that we want to achieve as part of those goals. Whatever decision we make, whether it's a charity with trustees or a committee on the board, there needs to be really strong vetting of the charities or causes that we choose to support, both their leadership and their financial management, their commitment to keeping costs low. We need to document what we expect to get out of those donations or out of those causes, and then we need to report over time on whether we've achieved those goals. My preference is that we make longer term investments over one-off donations. So like a charity with trustees may be the way that we reach that, but I think we would need to make a really strong case that the money that we invest in administration and overhead is better invested there than in working directly with charities that work on those purposes directly.
Nominet's already been down the road of having a trust with trustees, and I was on the board when the board decided to terminate that and bring it all in-house, which saved quite a bit of money, resources, and a lot of time. I don't think that was the wrong thing to do, and therefore, currently, no, I wouldn't support that. I would support the idea of the subcommittee with external advisors and see how that went.
I appreciate the direction that Andy Green's interim statement is taking the company, and I can understand the idea of forming a subcommittee on the board. However, I'm on record as advocating for an independent trust, which has of course been in place in the past at Nominet. I would like to see that this time put into the constitution so that it is unable, or sorry, the company is unable, without changing its constitution, to withdraw its support from the trust and to have a particular level of funding depending on the turnover of Nominet locked in. I think the amount of money that's involved, the immediate amount is up to about 50 or 60 million pounds within 3 years. puts a lot of responsibility on those on this subcommittee to hand it out. That may well then result in external advisors and so on being brought in at great cost. I would much rather a more formal arrangement entered into as quickly as possible, if that is what the membership supports, so that it can be locked in, guaranteed, given independence within the context of its founding principles, and then it could run outside of the board.
That's a very interesting question, and I don't think one can discount it at this point. However, we need to take things a step at a time. Releasing £50 million from the balance sheet is a very, very important step. It's a very great signal that Nominet wishes to be front and centre of ensuring that we have an ecosystem of internet innovation that is led by the support from Nominet funding. That is a task in itself. I would like us to go very slowly and very carefully, because we have fiduciary duty, which is very strong. We must, and no questions asked about this, we must get expert advice from external providers. And I am not, for example, I'd be happy to serve on that committee that puts these models together, but we must seek expert advice. We must seek expert legal advice about the positions of the way in which Nominet can actually operate. And then to the heart of the question about should we set up a charity, the Charity Commission requires charities to operate very, very clearly and transparently. And Nominet does that in some sense already. I'd be anxious about overlaying onto Nominet's operations and giving responsibility to board members more governance responsibility at a time when we need to tidy up the house for the moment. But there's no reason not to suppose that in a couple of years' time, in a future strategy, that could not be considered, because I think it's wise. And I think the way in which the Charities Commission does regulate its charities in the UK is very open and transparent, and the rules are very clear. But I just hesitate to think whether that is necessary at this juncture. So I'd like us to keep the conversation open, but for the moment, I think we should focus on the operational steps we need to take to get the strategy right and to implement the strategy.
Well, first of all, I think that's excellent news, and I'm personally delighted that there's going to be a subcommittee responsible for handing out the large reserves that Nominet have accrued. I don't think that it's necessary to create a charitable trust. Nominet had a charitable trust before that was very expensive to run. And the old board decided to shutter that. I think that was a valid decision, even if the previous board, I think, did it for the wrong reasons. It turns out that when the trust was disposed of and the decision-making was brought in-house to make it more efficient, what actually happened was that money wasn't distributed at all, and instead it was used to make acquisitions or increase executive pay. So I think that if there's a subcommittee and there's a well-run board, that is a good home for it and to be very efficient. I don't think that a charitable trust is needed at this point, but it could be a case of wait and see. But in the short term, no, a subcommittee and the board should be able to handle that.
I think because Nominet is supposed to be, or was originally prescribed to me as a not-for-profit organisation, I think rather like the National Lottery, there should be some charitable donations made, providing that the charities we're giving money to have been properly vetted.
The next three questions relate to the relationship between being a registrar and membership. So again, I'm going to ask all three questions and then ask you to answer each one in turn. The first of these three: should registrar access to domains at wholesale prices be possible without Nominet membership? The second is, do you support separating membership and governance from being a registrar? Why or why not? And the third, do you think membership or governance should be separated from being a registrar? So the first of those again: Should registrar access to domains at wholesale price be possible without Nominet membership?
Yes, ultimately, that's what I'd like to see the company work towards. And there would be a total separation of governance from access to registrar services. As I said before, you'd be able to do one or the other or both. There'd be no reason that you couldn't do both if you wanted to. But no longer would people be forced to take governance rights and governance issues on board if all they really wanted to do is access registry services, registered domain names, and they were not really interested in governance.
I think these are very interesting questions. I'm not sure right now there is enough, in my view, to deal with in the next 3 years, or hopefully less in some senses, in terms of Nominet's governance, that I don't see this as a focus that requires immediate attention. I think the question of whether or not one could have access to wholesale prices without being a member raises one difficulty that immediately springs to mind, and I'll admit that I haven't given this a huge amount of focus in my own thinking, but the purpose of the ability to get a wholesale price and then sell it on in a retail way is in order to enable the registrars to make money with the difference between the retail price that they choose to set and the wholesale price, which is universally set for all registrars by Nominet. If Nominet was able to sell at a wholesale price to people who weren't members, it does raise the spectre of retail customers, possibly, or large retail customers at least, coming to Nominet and cutting out the registrars. So that I would see as a potential problem to that idea. But as I say, I think there's more than enough to deal with in terms of governance changes that right now, that isn't something that I would urge the company to address immediately.
This is a very interesting evolutionary question about the nature of a registrar business. And you can see in a very simple go through the 2,500 or so members of Nominet that there are very different sizes and styles of the way in which the business is run. I want to think about this question, though, in terms of value to the member, value to the registrar. It's really important position of trust that when a person who wants to buy a domain name wants to choose a registrar to support that business ambition, that they're assured of the quality and the capacity of that registrar. Many of you will know in the ICANN environment, there is very strict registrar accreditation systems that require correct governance around the way in which registrars can provide service. That is not dissimilar to any other jurisdiction around the world that has registrars and their resellers selling domain names to end user customers. So I think it's a very nice two-way process for a member to get access to wholesale pricing for Nominet wholesale domains because it enforces a set of standards. But it's also very inclusive. And if we did a better job at member engagement, and if we did a better job at understanding registrar concerns, then I suspect that this question would fall away. I am an advocate, though, of ensuring that we have a mechanism to be inclusive on the one hand and to demonstrate that Nominet accreditation means something for registrar partners. But at the same time, I also want a very strong focus on consumer and end user satisfaction so that we do make sure that we have a set of standards that consumers of domain names and domain name services can be happy with. It's a quality question, not a am I getting something out of it question.
I don't believe so, because as evidenced from the EGM, there is a large amount of interest in the governance of Nominet. And while you have a large percentage of the membership, a non-insignificant portion of the membership who don't engage with issues, the majority do. And part of the strength of Nominet, one of the greatest strengths of Nominet, is its membership. If you decouple that and you only require, it's not mandatory or voting and governance doesn't accompany membership, and it becomes a separate model, then what you'll find is a further concentration of influence amongst a smaller number of larger members who can afford the registration fee or elect to maintain it, and it would undoubtedly make the organisation more commercial. Pursuing a profit agenda or only focusing on commercial activities would narrow Nominet's scope, and it would make it a less dynamic and a less interesting organisation. I think that it's important that members of all types and sizes are able to take a part in the governance of Nominet, and Nominet has the privilege of aggregating that mind share.
Absolutely not. That's what we pay our joining fee for. That's what we pay our annual subscription for. And you can't just walk into any shop and ask for wholesale prices because you're a business. So no, I firmly believe if you want wholesale prices, you make that commitment and you pay up and join Nominet.
So I personally feel like that would be working against the goals of a membership organization. If you want to be in the business of managing domains, then you need to be involved in the membership process. I think there is real risk in having a business that's built on Nominet services and not participating in the membership process and the governance process. I think there's also a real risk of limiting the membership contribution to just registrars. So I would say if you're going to be a registrar, you need to be a member, and the expectation of members is they participate. I think if you're going to be just managing domains outside of a registrar business, that's great. And I would hope that you would also participate as a member. I think we all benefit from the increased participation of members across the registrar and membership and various business types.
The second, do you support separating membership and governance from being a registrar? Why or why not?
There's a genuine question as to the appropriateness of having your largest customers as also the owners of a company. But in a sense, right now we are where we are. There are questions as to whether having the membership own the company that sets the prices for the product, whether that raises questions on competition law and other such things. Again, Nominet has existed in this regard for some considerable time without major difficulties. I'm not in favour of destabilising the company in any way other than deciding on its philosophy and then seeking, if that is a change, is what membership wants, to bring that about. So as with the previous question, there are debates to be had on this, but again, right now, it's working sufficiently well compared to other things that I think have caused significant problems within the company, that it's something that I wouldn't advocate addressing immediately. But there are issues about ownership and customers being the same body, but again, let's leave it for now, is my opinion.
At the moment, I think that we've got a maturity issue, and I think we've got a member and registrar. The notion of membership and the notion of what a registrar does is actually a bit disconnected at the moment. And I would think that in this transitional phase where we're moving towards a new board, where we're moving towards a new strategy, and where frankly we're looking at enormous disruption in the registry services industry itself, it's a worthy question to ask. But when we're looking at integrated registry and registrar operations, where registrars are operating also as registries, we need to be very, very careful about what we're playing with here. And I would think that there's some unintended consequences if we try to tinker too much at the moment with our model here, because there are bigger questions that we need to focus on. But there's no reason, again, as I've reiterated in a few answers to other questions, is that we must keep the channels of communication open. And if, for example, members were to come to the board to say, board members, we have come up with this idea, we would like to have a consultation process about it, then we take that as the board very, very seriously, because our members are asking us for their support and they're asking us for their assistance to make sure that we can develop the organisation and develop our member profile in a way that is fit for purpose. Now, it's quite clear that the chairman of the board's focus is on registry services at the heart of what Nominet does. And that then delivers the other sets of activities around the draft strategy that has been released. And registry operations are not registrar operations. They're different. And there are some significant public policy issues that are going on at the moment. First of all, around GDPR and the implementation of WHOIS. Secondly, around network security and resilience and critical infrastructure support. And the third is in privacy protection and consumer understanding of the market. And I think we just need to settle just a little and ask this question in a bigger context, which says, what problem are we trying to solve? What's the issue that we're trying to solve? And is this the right way to resolve it?
No, I don't. I think it's critical that Nominet has a wide range of members that represent all different sizes and different types and different industries or specializations within, the domain interest. And the loss of that would ultimately affect the character of Nominet in the long run. You can't have you can't have one type, you can't have a monoculture of membership and then expect to get diverse inputs. It won't happen. At the moment, the current system works well in as much as there's a broad range of members that take an interest in how Nominet is governed, and Nominet and the wider UK Internet and .uk benefit as a result of that.
Well, if I'm going to be an NED and I'm going to still be a member, I can't see why you'd want to separate it, because I wouldn't give up my membership to be an NED. I don't see why I should. I can be both.
So I think this goes back to the same issue. I think membership shouldn't be limited to just registrars. I think registrars should be members. I think we have a better system when we have a wider range of stakeholders that are implementing policies that are contributing to the process. We have much better results if you understand a wider range of issues than if you're making decisions based on just one business group or one business type. So rather than trying to cut out membership based on any sort of business type or business group, I'd rather see that Nominet focus on diversifying its membership, on encouraging participation from that membership, and making sure that we're engaging with members of all types so that we end up with better policy. It's really difficult to find ways to represent registrants, but I think the best way that we can do that is by encouraging a diverse range of membership and engagement from those members at Nominet.
I do support separating the two. I feel that it would be good if those who didn't want anything to do with governance and were not interested could just get along with registering domain names and managing their domains as they wish without having to be burdened with governance if they're not interested. Likewise, if they are interested and they do understand it, then they should have the option of being involved in it if they wanted to. Thank you.
And the final one in this trio, do you think membership or governance should be separated from being a registrar?
I think I've covered it in the other two answers. If you're happy, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
No, see my previous answers on this.
Absolutely not. I can't see why you can't do both.
So again, no, I think if you're a registrar, you should be a member, and you should be allowed to be a member even if you're not a registrar.
Yes, I do feel they should be separated. I don't feel I'm the only one. I've written about it at davidthornton.uk, and I support that in the future.
Well, I think that's a similar question to the last one, and there are potential issues about control of the business. But the membership is, whilst they are all registrars, there are registrars for different reasons. And so there is quite a broad church within the membership. No one, I think, would suggest that the membership is a unified voice, that is how it should be. So again, at the moment, I think there are sort of debates, perhaps almost philosophical debates to some extent, but also practical, but they're not at the top of the agenda as far as I would suggest.
Moving on to domain cost pricing. Again, we have two questions that are very similar. As before, I'll ask you the two questions, and then I'll ask each one in turn and ask for your response. The first of that pair, the board decided to freeze domain cost pricing until 2024. Do you support this approach? Should Nominet instead reduce their surplus via an immediate price reduction?
Okay, so I think that it's a practical and prudent step to guarantee a price freeze until 2024, and I support the board's decision to do that, broadly because of the background economic situation. We've got Brexit, we've had COVID, and there's rising inflation. So we don't know what the future is going to look like, and the board have agreed to start divesting itself of a large amount of reserves, as well as £5 million a year of additional cash. So, for the next few years, I think it's reasonable to take a look at how that pans out. What are the net effects of all of those sort of currently unknown things, to ensure that we provide confidence to .UK stakeholders and the rest of the community and government. The promise not to increase prices until 2024 isn't a promise not to reduce them. So it's quite possible that within the next 2 years, the board, having looked at all of the facts and figures, will be able to make a reduction. But in the short term, I don't think it's a bad approach at all.
Right. Personally, if I was in charge of this, I would keep the pricing as it is, and I wouldn't reduce it, because the surplus could be used into research of domain names, different extensions we can make, and to help combat domain fraud.
So I'm very happy to see this commitment from the board. I think this is one step that it can take to improving membership trust and transparency in this process. So I'm very happy to see that change, and I definitely support that change. Nominet is effectively a monopoly. The way that we view this within my team is that anything that we charge for a domain over and above the cost of managing and maintaining that domain is a tax. So when we effectively tax the membership, then we need to be able to justify that. And as a monopoly, then Nominet needs to take extra care and provide extra transparency in that process. That said, I don't think now is the time for a price drop. I think it is a somewhat uncertain business atmosphere that we find ourselves in right now. I mean, I live in Germany, so I don't need to tell people in the UK, but when we see rising inflation, when we see issues with fuel shortages, or at least delivery shortages, we're looking at a pretty uncertain business environment, and I don't think that is a great time to reduce pricing and surplus. I'd rather invest in the public benefit initiative and try to create a better world around us for the next few years, and then review pricing afterwards.
Yes, I supported that. I am on the board. So yes, I do support the price freeze. However, I don't feel domains should be reduced substantially, because they can be too cheap. And then you end up getting lots of registrations that potentially have no benefit to the registry, spam registrations, and the product, which is what I consider UK to be. The namespace is a product that people buy into. It's devalued, and they don't consider it's worth having, because they look at the price perhaps and they think that's just not value. It's not good value. It's too cheap. And I feel we like to have things which we consider are of value. So decreasing the price too much would not make sense to the product.
Firstly, I welcome what is a change in terms of no longer looking to increase the domain name prices, which is what has been happening recently. But I do believe that whilst the chair's interim statement is welcomed to some extent, I would advocate for a review of domain name prices more urgently than in a 3-year freeze, because the current price is generating a significant surplus. I don't think that's appropriate. I think at the very least, the more recent price increases should be reversed, and also the method which used to be controlled or restricted so that the membership needed to approve price rises, should something along those lines should be reintroduced. It was referred to, I think, as the Hutty Clause 19A in the memorandum and articles. I am in favour of Nominet being a not-for-profit, and so if it's making a large profit, whilst I'm happy and would urge for that to be given to good causes, I would rather it was not making a large profit. I don't want it to make a loss, but I don't want it. I want to make some sort of operating profit so that it's secure and stable. But beyond that, I don't think the prices need to be as high as they are.
This is a very interesting question, and it conflates two different concepts. So I am a supporter of the wholesale price cap and freeze until 2024. And I'm supportive of that because it enables registrar partners of Nominet to set their business planning and their pricing for end user services to their customers in a way that's predictable for quite a long time. The fact that there is volatility and competition between registries to get registrars to sell their domain names, customers do have a choice. But I think at this juncture, with the way in which the reallocation of the balance sheet, and with a really serious new focus on the way in which this public good and profit for a purpose of supporting initiatives in the broader community is, in my mind, a more important balancing of two different concepts. So on the one side, a wholesale reduction instantly to split the surplus that Nominet does have on its balance sheet and give it, in effect, to registrars is unbalanced. It sounds like a good idea at the surface, but what I think we need to do, and this is a fairness question, it's a balance question, it's a stakeholder question, that is, if the registrars and registrar partners are able, and resellers are able to have security and stability in their pricing model until 2024, that is one part of an advantage for them, and it's up to them to manage their operational overheads as they see fit. And on the other side, I do believe it's better for Nominet to be in the position, which it is internationally, in the ecosystem of registry services, to be seen to be doing good, and not only seen to be doing good, but reporting on it. And one of the things which I will be really focusing on if I'm on the board is that we measure ourselves correctly and we report on impact, we report on sustainability and report on actual benefit rather than a notional benefit of we just think we're going to distribute money for a particular purpose. So the measurement to me is really important.
And the second question, the board has said it will freeze the annual wholesale price of the domain until at least 2024. Do you agree with this approach? If Nominet is making a surplus, should the wholesale price be reduced further or reviewed every year?
I agree with keeping the price as it is, frozen, but I wouldn't agree to any price reduction, because any surplus, I said previously, can be used into researching and combating domain name fraud, which is too much of it in the minute.
So yes, again, I definitely support the price freeze. I think that was the right step, and I think it's a really positive commitment from the board. When it comes to pricing, at Nominet, a regular review of pricing is really important. And I think pricing needs to be reviewed against Nominet's financial performance. So looking at how domain under management numbers have progressed over time and what the track for the future is, we're lucky that we're in a very predictable business. We need to look at the market risks and opportunities, look ahead and understand how we think our business and political and cultural and environmental factors are going to affect that business long term. We need to look at our reserves and make sure that those reserves are ensuring the independence of the organization, but also allowing us to invest effectively in our systems and infrastructure and manage technical debt. And then we also need to balance that with commitments to public benefit causes. So pricing is something that should be reviewed. I think implementing the weights principles of corporate governance would be a really great way to make sure that we're tying pricing decisions into Nominet's core purpose, which is being the UK registry, and then having a public benefit impact on top of that as well. So I'm happy to look at a price review, but I would say my stated goal is not to get the price as close to zero as possible. In my experience working with other CCTLD registries and even GTLD registries, there are knock-on effects of having a really low price, and a lot of that comes at the expense of abuse of the DNS or of domain names. So the price doesn't need to be zero, but it needs to be reviewed against our core objectives and make sure we're not taxing members without a public benefit impact.
I feel Nominet, as we have done, should review its prices. It's normal for any company to do that. As regards the surplus, again, I don't feel the product should be cheapened, and I feel that the price is fairly reflective of the product and what you're getting. Our competitor.com charges substantially more, and Nominet's very competitive in that respect, but I wouldn't want it to slash its prices to the point where the product seemed devalued and there was no confidence in it. And people were thinking, God, this is just not, this is too cheap. How can they provide a good service at this price? That's not a good thing.
Well, as I've said, I think there is a strong argument for reducing the price. Certainly the existing or recent price rises should be looked at and probably reversed, but also a proper review using modelling to see what impact there would be on profit and turnover and so on by reducing prices, and then present that to the membership as the direction we would like to take it. And as I say, also look at the Constitution to prevent that being reversed too easily in the future.
I want to just address the end of that question. Should the wholesale price be reviewed every year? If we look at a strategic output, which, for example, deals with 2021 to 2025 or 2024, that's a reasonable forward-looking output. That's a reasonable forward-looking forecast upon which not only Nominet can plan its business operations, but also its registrar partners can plan their business operations as well. You would have heard in the CEO's video, I beg your pardon, not the CEO's video, the chairman's video, where there's a very specific focus on reporting, on benchmarking, and on accountability. And I'd very much like to see that system and process of, this is our intention, and in 6 months we're going to measure ourselves, and in 12 months we're going to release a report, and we're going to measure ourselves openly and in a very transparent and accountable way, is much more important for me than having a yearly market disruption, a yearly disruption in a wholesale price. And it needs to be measured from some baseline metrics, which unfortunately we don't seem to have enough of at the moment. And there's this sufficient inflection point that enables us as a new board to implement those measures and to be very clear about what we're measuring and to report on that very openly. So I would not be an advocate of an instantaneous move to a yearly shift, but I would be an advocate of allowing us to freeze the prices until 2024, as has been spoken about, and then think about ways in which we would develop the revenue model as we go along, but after we've had some settled state.
Yeah, I do agree with the approach. I think ultimately the price freeze to 2024 doesn't preclude a price drop in a year or two's time. It seems to me like very reasonable to have an annual review of the prices. But ultimately, I think some sort of consistency in pricing is good for the market. We don't want to find that we cut the price too much and then a year later go, whoops, it's up to higher than it was before, and then a year after that go, no, we messed it up again, let's go down again. A few years worth of seeing what these changes make to the surplus and waiting for stuff to kick out, plus seeing what the effects of Brexit, COVID and inflation are, and then going, okay, we think we can safely reduce it by this much, waiting a year, looking again, that was still too high, we'll drop it again a bit further, but trying to provide the market with some consistency so that we're not constantly changing prices and members are having to faff around. I think there's a balancing line to be walked there.
The next member question. The board has now committed to spending 50 million of its reserve funds over the next 3 years. If elected, what would you like to see these funds spent on?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd say I have a lot of personal opinions on what the money could be spent on, but I don't think it is my job on the board to go in and try to just fight for my pet projects. So I'd say the question shouldn't really be about what I personally would like to invest money on. I think that needs to be a collaborative process that involves members, stakeholders, so not even just members, I would say even in staff and the wider public, to really define, as I mentioned before, to really define our core goals and what we want to accomplish. I think the more specific we can be in what we want to accomplish and what our specific measures are for measuring that progress, the better the outcome and the increased transparency that we see in which goals we want to support and whether we consider that support to be successful or not. I think there are a lot of causes that would be related to Nominet's role in the internet infrastructure that you would find a lot of support from across the organization, whether that's making sure that Nominet's reducing its carbon imprint, whether it's increasing diversity within the internet industry. I mean, if we look at the industry now, there is definitely a type of person that tends to be active in the industry, mainly white men. And I think Nominet could do great work in increasing the participation from across wider society. You know, there are a lot of ways that we could impact children and poorer communities to improve their access to internet, to improve their access to opportunities in society. So I think there's a lot that Nominet can do, but it's not about me. It's about membership engagement and finding something that we can find common ground on and are excited to change.
So I feel that 50 million is, I think that they're meaning towards good causes and charities and that sort of thing. I have no major opinion of what that should be put to at the moment, but I think the board would have to evaluate that and take external advice on it. It just depends. There are plenty of probably good causes that Nominet could donate some of that money to.
Well, first of all, I'm not entirely sure 50 million is the right figure. I think 25 million plus 5 for 3 years plus a possible other 25 was how it broke down. But without splitting hairs, I very much support this announcement from Andy Green. I have already said that I think the most prudent and appropriate way of dealing with this is to create an independent body, a trust, to lock funding of that into the Nominet constitution, including its guiding principles. I would like to go out to the membership and invite them to have, I'm sure plenty of the members have a lot to say about how they think such a large sum of money would be spent. And having had a consultation, lock in appropriate guiding principles, which I think, from my own personal point of view, would involve a focus on doing good within the UK, in the technology sector, being carbon neutral, and focusing on being good for the climate in terms of the type of projects we'd be involved in. Education and enabling those who don't have access to technology, particularly in their education, during their education, to be better able to get access to it. That type of thing, with what is a large sum of money, not in a government sense large sum of money, but in a private company sense, a significant sum of money. It needs to be spent wisely.
The first thing I want to say about this is a substantial amount of money that can make an amazing difference, really amazing difference to real people and real businesses. And I'd certainly want us to be focusing on a system where we did focus on results. We did need to measure results. So that's that overarching sort of principle for me. The way in which that I just happen to be an education advocate. To me, focusing on educational opportunities for underserved communities is absolutely critical. And I don't need to draw anyone's attention to the enormous inequities in the provision of educational materials for children in the government-supported sector compared to the private sector. I would very much hope that we could do some significant work in communities of interest where they're community-led initiatives that enable us to deliver the very best technical services to children to enable them to learn. And that's from little tiny kindergarten children right up until year 12 and A level or GCSE level. So that's a particular passion of mine. The other part of that piece is, of course, a focus on encouraging careers in STEM. And I think we've got a long way to go in working out how we can facilitate the development of younger people beyond school into careers that will support a modern international global economy. And I'm not saying that because we need to follow the mantra of high skill, high wage jobs in the United Kingdom. We do that anyway. But I do want us to be focusing on opportunities for underserved communities. And I particularly want to support the underserved communities of women and girls, where we know that there is a gender pay gap, which is unacceptable in the 21st century. I don't know why that is the case. And I'm hoping that the way in which we could focus on that will be on entrepreneurial initiatives for which there are many, many good models, but that we don't close our minds off to the next possibility. The last piece of that is I really want Nominet playing a very important role in the international ecosystem, of which it's a critical part. And we can do some very good work in countries and environments where there is not sufficient investment, but there is enormous possibility.
That's an excellent question. First of all, I'm delighted that the board has decided to do that. We were campaigning on a number of issues, and one of them was that the reserve was too large. So I'm delighted to see that Andy Green has agreed with that and decided to liberate some of those funds. They will be much better used going to good causes than sat in a bank account accruing interest. So I think there are probably three main areas where I would like to see that money used. The first is in closing the digital divide, an area that Nominet has been involved in, but with a larger budget could do considerably more. The second area is with providing next generation of software developers, something that the UK economy will sorely need as we become a more tertiary service-driven kind of world. And the third and final area where I'd like to see that money be used is my pet passion, and probably won't be a surprise to anyone that knows me, is the environment. We've clearly got massive issues when it comes to the environment with climate change. And I think that some of that money should be used towards fixing up the environment and providing a future for our kids and grandkids.
£50 million. As I said previously, I'm very, very passionate about stopping domain name fraud. At the minute, there's a problem with COVID names. There's all sorts of people passing off, changing domain names look similar to real domain names. So that money should be used to combat this personally. That's what I think. There's too much domain name fraud at the minute.
We now have some questions that broadly relate to strategy. The board is committed to ensuring that all non.UK services contribute to reducing the overall cost of running the core registry. What products do you think Nominet should be involved in?
Nominet's already involved in registry service providing, which it has been doing since 5-6 years now, and I think that should continue. I'd like it to expand in some areas into the domain industry, maybe with some related DNS products, DNS security, similar to the PDNS it does. I think we have to be mindful that we don't step on too many members' toes at the moment, because members provide us with our income. But it's important that Nominet does look at related services and businesses that it could be in, because it's always good practice to work in your industry and look at other areas too.
I am unashamedly in favour of narrowing Nominet's focus and focusing much more, and again I welcome what Andy Green said in his interim statement, focusing much more on the .uk registry than it has been in the recent past. Broadly speaking, outside of the UK registry and the role that Nominet now provides to the government in terms of security services, I'm actually in favour of limiting what Nominet does. I'm not entirely sure that it is fair to those with whom Nominet competes, that Nominet has the guaranteed income stream of .uk, whereas commercial competitors don't enjoy that benefit. So personally, I'm in favour of really keeping our focus on what our job is and leaving the commercial sector to itself.
I think this is a really important question that has exercised many clever brains. And I think that the centre, we know that Nominet must focus on its core registry business. We know that because it's so important. I think that the protective DNS service is really also a critical piece of the puzzle, which provides layers of expertise and inbuilt network and resilience that are very, very important to us. I think that with respect to other services, I think that it's time to ask those questions. It's clear that the Siglass business is being sold. And hopefully that will give us an opportunity to think about what to do with the funds that come from that sale to really focus on public benefit. What is it in terms of a product set that Nominet can offer to our community that does make a difference? And that is not yet an answered question for me. I'm not satisfied that I have sufficient information from a strategic point of view that we've examined that possibility in sufficient depth. And I'm hoping that we use that as an opportunity to engage with members and to engage with our stakeholders outside of the membership, to ensure that we have a very open communication. And it's clear that the chair really wants to do that. I'm absolutely committed to it, to be running stakeholder engagement processes that really matter to people, so that people felt listened to, so that people felt heard. Because I think one of the problems has been a shutdown of communication, which has not served the organisation well. And this particular strategic question is really important for us to come together as a community to have an open-minded conversation, but certainly an open-minded conversation that is not run in a way that is vicious, that is run on social media, that is run on a campaign, that is run hoping that the result is somehow commercially important to a particular sector or business or industry. It's an open conversation about the contribution we together can make to ensure that Nominet does deliver on its profit for a purpose, clear mission.
As few as possible, honestly. I think that Nominet had a very tight remit in terms of what it should be doing, which was to run .uk. Back in 2008, enum was narrowly approved by the membership, and a clause was added that permitted enum, but it also left the door ajar for other services, and that vagueness was exploited to permit a diversion into cyber and other activities. I think Nominet needs to, well, it has agreed to stop looking into cyber. It's committed to PDNS, and it should focus on .uk and registry services. But other than that, those should be encapsulated in the articles, and it shouldn't do anything else. It should just do a very narrow subset of things very, very well. So to answer your question, as few as possible, registry related, registry essential.
The only thing I can think of is, I don't know, it's to have some sort of proxy if and when the GDPR is watered down, so you can register, like a single woman working at home, for instance, doesn't want to give her home address, so she can have use Nominet's address, but only on the proviso that if there is a legal problem, Nominet will release those details to the courts. And you can maybe charge, I don't know, like £5 a year to use Nominet as a proxy to protect people working from home.
So I feel that Nominet's core focus is its registry service, its UK registry service. And that needs to become its first and primary focus before all else. Other services need to be justified against Nominet's purpose and its public benefit mission. And I think when you're making that evaluation, you have to look at a number of various issues. You have to look at the appropriate risk appetite for the organization. And I think in Nominet's case, that's very low. So it can't be a risky adventure. It needs to be something that fits into Nominet's core strengths. And I see those as building, maintaining stable and secure systems. We have a strong expertise in DNS infrastructure and really strong data management and protection practices. I think it needs to be something that doesn't threaten Nominet's independence. So it has to be something that allows the organization to continue running the registry without external, I'd say, like taking over the running of the registry. And it needs to enable the organization to further that primary purpose. So maybe it helps the organization to find the best staff, to improve its system stability and security, or to increase the public benefit impact. So if it can meet those various criteria, I think it could be a candidate. That said, I think Nominet needs to improve in including members in decision making around going into other services, and allowing members' critique of those decisions to play a strong part in the decision making around that.
And the next question: the board has decided not to continue with the strategy of building a portfolio of complementary cyber businesses, and has therefore started a process to sell Cyglass. How would you like to see the board learn from the mistakes and losses made with Cyglass? Well,
as I've said to previous questions, my view is that Nominet should focus very much on its .uk registry. That in my mind is its role. So what to learn is don't do it again.
This is a very difficult question, and I think the previous board needs to take ownership of that. And there is enormous opportunity for us to be humble. There's an enormous opportunity for us to say, crumbs, we got it wrong. And there are, current candidates that have been part of that process, and they need to think very, very clearly about their role in that. We also need to be very, very careful that the board members we do elect in this round are able to be critical friends of the organisation. And I mean critical, and I mean friends. I don't mean board members interfering in the operations of the organisation. And I do mean making sure that the board absolutely supports expert executive staff in bringing to the board ideas for how we can get past this difficulty, we can get past losses, and we can absolutely learn from them. And I think we need to write the learning down. Write it down and share it with each other, and make sure that it's the subtext of the conversations we have about, and now what? And now what? And there's more than enough for us to be getting along with the core operations of what Nominet does in a highly competitive registry services business, which is global in its scope and scale. And there's enough for us to be getting on without not only reliving the history, because I think we're past that. We need to get past that activism. We need to get past that dissatisfaction and that campaign of dissatisfaction about the organisation, and move forward to thinking, again, it's an opportunity for us to ask members. It's another opportunity to ask our stakeholders. We have this possibility. We have operational capability. There is no doubt about that. And we should really be thinking in a humble and careful and open way about how we can get the best ideas forward, and then how we prioritize those ideas, how we make decisions, how we fund them, and then how we put them into practice. It's a very, very orderly process. At the same time, we have to operate at internet speed, and that is a challenge. Those two things, there's great tension between them, but I think we can do it.
Yeah, a bittersweet sort of decision, obviously, because about £7.5 million is currently being wasted on diversification into cyber, and all of them have now been written off or will be written off, and were loss-making. So clearly glad that we've ended that folly, but sad that we wasted that much money. I think it's important that Cyglass is disposed of responsibly to a UK beneficiary to ensure that the UK benefits. And I think that the lessons really for the board are quite simple. Focus on your core registry services and don't act or think like a commercial entity. Nominet is a not-for-profit. It runs a monopoly. It has the exclusive rights to distribute.uk. That is a phenomenal privilege and warrants full attention.
Well, the only way to do that is to do a Ebony Bono cost-benefit analysis. There's plus and minus points for keeping it and not keeping it, but I don't think all these other sidelines are really what Nominet's about. It's about domain names.
So I think if I can be so bold, I'd say maybe the board has learned. You know, I think the EGM was a real change of direction. And I think the reason that I'm running right now is that I feel that I could have an impact on the board to move Nominet away from a startup and acquisition strategy and into focusing on its core public benefit mission. So I feel like the board has learned, and now I would like to step in and cement those changes. And I think the key to cementing those changes right now is really through effective corporate governance and maximizing the impact of the Waits governance principles in the coming years. I think really effective governance will solve a lot of the issues that led to Siglass in the first place, and also to the AGM. And so I hope that this is a real change, a long-term permanent change for Nominet, and I'd really like to be a part of making that happen.
The issue with Siglass is it was bought quite cheaply. It was pre-revenue and it's still a pre-revenue business. So if you're selling a pre-revenue business, effectively you've expected to have incurred losses until you've turned it into something that generates revenue. Obviously, there was a reason for buying Siglass. It wasn't just that we were intending on buying one cybersecurity business. The idea behind it was to buy several, and then you would sort of link them all together and have some kind of profitable product. Obviously, Nominet's decided to get out of that now. It's decided it's not where it wants to be, and that's what you have. You know, you would expect if you were to buy multiple businesses, which were all pre-revenue, some of them would fail and some of them wouldn't generate your revenue. But if you'd bought more than one, you'd have expected some of them to actually have generated you revenue and the whole thing to have been profitable. So it's very hard to say you've learned something when you've really only began the task and then you've stopped it, as we have. Thank you.
And a few questions now relating more to operational matters. When it comes to registering in-demand expiring domains, which method do you favour? The present drop-catching status quo, an auction model, a free-to-enter lottery system, or economically controlled access at £1,000 a year?
This is a very hard question, really hard question. And the reason why it's hard is there's two ends of answering it. The first end is what's in the best interest of consumers? What's in the best interests of our end users that build the traffic around the United Kingdom ecosystem of the internet? So is the end user best served by one model alone? Those four you've presented are quite different and there's nuances between them. And I don't know the answer to that question. I think we need to examine it in more detail. We certainly need to have an examination of the impact on the end user market. We certainly need to ask those questions. We also then need to think about affordability. So affordability for registrars to run this kind of purpose. What is the purpose of running a registrar? It's to make money. It's to provide service. It's to be good to your customers. And I don't know that the old drop catch system, which has been around for a very, very long time, is the best way to do it, because it assumes a level of technical expertise which can, in some instances, and has been in the global registrar market, been used for less than helpful purposes. again, I'd really want to be listening to members about their experience of running one of the 4 opportunities. I'd really want to be focusing on the last piece of it, which is technical soundness. Does the choice of a particular model have to be an exclusive choice? I don't know the answer to that question because I need to see the evidence. And if there is a choice of models, then how does the market run that efficiently? And that is up to the registrars to implement. The final point of this is, though, I think the way in which we treat the who is. And that is a broader question around my particular subject matter expertise on privacy protection and network security and the use of the who is in the context of GDPR. But at the same time, I'm certainly in favour of finding opportunities for registrars to evolve their business models and to make money in different ways.
So the first thing I'll say is that this is an area that I haven't done enough research on and would be happy to look into further. From my limited understanding of what's going on, I know that Nominet tried to put forward an auction model, which only one other TLD in the world supports, which I think is Estonia. And though that was shot down and we signed a petition to get that cancelled, it was simply the mechanism by which Nominet could generate the most revenue, and it was a commercial mindset again. I don't think economic access is the way to go, because not everyone can afford £1,000 a year just to pay to play. But I'm aware that the current system, the current status quo, is also being abused by a small number of people who are gaming the system and running multiple tags and effectively not being clamped down on. So I think that it would probably be an improvement to the current system that was a level playing field and fair for everyone who's a member to play, and that there was increased efforts by Nominet to make sure that the system wasn't being abused. Beyond that, I can only say if this is an interesting topic to you and I become elected, let's have a conversation about it, and I'll use my best judgment to make sure it's fair.
I think an auction is the way to go. I don't really like the drop catching method. I don't think it's fair. If somebody really wants a domain name, they put their money where put their wallet on the table and buy it. So I think an auction is good, and that will make surplus funds to invest in other parts of Nominet. So for me, it would be the auction method. It is quite often on other TLDs, the auction method.
So I wouldn't say I have to pick A, B, or C, but I would like to speak to some of the issues I see with the current system. So I think the current system has good policies in place to ensure that members are only accessing the system over their own tag, and to make sure that there's an acceptable use policy that covers the concerns that members may have around sharing credentials and access to the system. So there should be fair access to the system. I think Nominet needs to be very attentive to any members that have concerns about members sharing credentials to tags, and make sure that Nominet enforces the EPP acceptable use policy. I think those policies are in place for a reason. They should be enforced. When it comes to the system and the access that is enabled to the system, I think the priority should be a technical priority, and that is to protect the registration system. Right now, I see a really high number of hit points allowed per day for registration requests on domains that are already registered. I'd prefer to see that burden placed on the availability check system instead of the registration system. So reduce the number of hit points per day and increase the number of allowed availability checks per day, so that if there is a burden placed on the system, it's not on the registration system, which is, technically speaking, the most important system and the system that requires the most stability and security. I think Nominet should consider looking at a model that charges for domain availability checks. Domain availability checks place an outsized burden on the system from a technical perspective, without an outsized increase in registrations. And so if we're going to look at a model that charges for access, it needs to be placed in that area, and allow long-term access and billing.
I feel I'd like a hybrid, actually, because I think Nominet registrars who might not have experienced the alternatives should at least have a taste of what's possible. I do like auctions for a number of reasons. However, I'm not against economic controlled access. I just don't think it should be a free-for-all where anybody who can pay £100 a year can just get in on it, because there's too many people doing it now, and it's too cheap to do it. It's too good value for those involved in it, and it needs to be fairer, and fairer for the registry as well, because the product does belong to the registry at the end of the day. And I'd like to see better controls on this, and we could try a hybrid option of perhaps economic controlled access along with auctions. I certainly wouldn't like to rule out auctions, because I think they can work very well, but I'm going to write an article about how auctions could work really well based on experience with another registry. So check out davidthornton.uk if you want to know more.
In my view, we're facing a number of significant challenges and questions about Nominet's future. So, as with one or two of the other issues raised in these questions, whilst I can see that there is a need for them to be reviewed, and perhaps the RAC is a great place for these conversations to start and recommendations to be presented to the board in due course. In the immediate term, I think we should be focusing on whether or not the entire ethos of Nominet, but it is, if one takes the interim statement from the chair as it is that there is already a significant change in the ethos of the company. I'd like to see it go further. And if I was being asked which of those options to take, right now, certainly I'd favour the status quo. There's enough change going on without increasing change. I'm certainly not in favour of Nominet becoming an auctioneer. The other options I'd be happy to review in a more detailed way in due course. But right now, I would stick with the status quo.
And now our penultimate question. The chair has called the long-term incentive scheme a misstep that the board has corrected. Do you agree with this statement? And how would you like to see senior executives rewarded going forwards?
Yes, I agree with that. And again, I commend Andy Green on his strong position there to reverse that. It's the right decision. Executive pay was out of control and had increased 70% in the last 5 years. The long-term incentive program was just one of these methods to ensure that, you know, more value was extracted from Nominet, and it was an abuse of power, and in my opinion, completely unnecessary. The reality is that Nominet should pay competitive salaries, or more than competitive salaries, for similar, benchmarked against similar technology non-profit organizations, of which there are a number of good references available. Ultimately, working at Nominet is an exciting job. You're running critical national infrastructure. It's a large company, and it operates in a vital part of the internet. If being paid twice what the Prime Minister's paid and running critical national infrastructure doesn't excite you, then the job isn't for you. I think a high salary and taking pride in your work and knowing that you're doing something fundamentally important that benefits the public should be reward enough.
Bonuses should be only awarded on merit, not on length of service or other things, so other models. So someone makes a really good effort and they bring something to the party, then yes, give them a bonus. Otherwise, you stick with your salary.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was a misstep. And, I think it's another big win from the EGM to have this statement coming from the board. So personally, I think we need to look at how we benchmark pay. In the past, I heard the board talk a lot about benchmarking pay against other IT companies and startups. I think Nominet needs to benchmark itself against other not-for-profit organizations and member organizations, and even look at similar IT organizations with a not-for-profit purpose, like, for example, the Links Internet Exchange or other CCTLD registries. So we need to change who we benchmark against, and it shouldn't be VeriSign, and it shouldn't be Google, and it shouldn't be Facebook. I don't think Wall Street style incentive programs are right for this kind of business. And I think when it comes to compensation, I always take two approaches to it. First is you get what you pay for. So if we want to promote stability, our public benefit impact, and effective and transparent governance, then we need to tie that to pay and not profits to pay. And then the second is you measure is what you get. And so we need to build reporting that shows the effectiveness of both the staff and the board in achieving those goals. The last thing I'd like to say is I think it's really important that there is a really strong correlation between executive pay and staff salaries. And anytime you have exorbitant executive pay and that isn't reflected in exorbitant staff salaries, then you have a problem. So I think we could include staff salaries in the benchmarks for understanding how we pay the executives at Nominet.
It's a difficult one because at the time, the LTI was considered by some very sensible and smart people as being relevant to what was needed, because Nominet was looking to incentivize staff when we went into areas which were highly competitive. I think at the time, those people who decided that the LTI was the correct way forwards didn't think this is a misstep, this is the wrong thing. But I think with the benefit of hindsight and where the company is now, you could sort of suggest that it was a misstep and it's not suitable for the company as it is now, but it was possibly suitable for where it was or where it wanted to go 5 years ago. I certainly feel we should have some kind of incentives for senior executives. It depends, and I think that's something that the Remuneration Committee will explore in the future.
In 2008, when I was elected to the board, we had the then LTIP, or at least part of it, removed. It reappeared in a different guise and resulted in, frankly, in my view, excessive remuneration for some of the senior executives. A not-for-profit company should not have profit-related long-term incentive bonuses for executives. I'm not even sure it should have any form of profit-related bonus scheme. Its purpose is not to make money, it is to provide and run the .uk domain name space in the best possible way. In my view, the executive should be remunerated in a consistent way with the not-for-profit and charity sector, not with the commercial tech sector, and a wholesale review of the salary structure of Nominet would be part of the governance change that I would be advocating.
I think that the chair is correct, but that's not to say, in this particular interest, but that is not to say that we mustn't think clearly about ways in which to retain and compensate and pay for highly expert staff to support the complexities of this organisation. So just saying we're going to have one thing that we do in one particular way, I don't think is helpful. I think it doesn't help to be seen to be excessive. And I think that the work which the independent board director, Ebba Lindquist, has done is very important in terms of remuneration. We do know, though, that there is a global shortage, and it's not just in the UK, it's absolutely worldwide. In data scientists, we know that there's a real shortage of people who've got experience in the domain name industry, even though the industry has been very fluid. And you see regularly the poaching of expert staff from, for example, one registry operator to another. I've just seen that in the last week. So we need to be extremely careful about making a one-slice dimension for the way in which we think about executive pay. We must be clear. We must have KPIs in place. We must have performance development plans. But honestly, that is the operational material that I think I'd be expecting advice from the CEO on. The new CEO needs to be able to say to the board, this is how I'm going to take the organisation forward. This is what it's going to cost. This is what it looks like for us to be able to recruit and retain staff members, because there's been enormous disruptive turnover in operational staff. And I think it can be clearly said that the turmoil that happened in the last 12 months or so has not been a positive experience for staff members, but we are not in a position to be able to lose them. So there's a broader HR question going on here, and I'm hoping very much to be able to work with the other board members and the CEO and the executive team to work out a sensible way forward, not an excessive way, but a sensible way forward that manages, that recognises market dynamics for talent.
Thank you. And finally, what steps will you take to meet Nominet members and listen to their views, concerns and ideas?
Right. At the moment, because of COVID, it's very difficult to travel. And as some of you know, I don't live anywhere near Oxford. I live in Bulgaria. So happy to do it online anytime you like. And once the COVID situation is under control, I'm happy to jump on a plane and come to Oxford. The only other problem is, for instance, I recently had a flight cancelled. So things do happen. So you can arrange these things, and by the will of God, you can't do anything.
So I think there's two ways to look at that question. The first is, what do I think the board needs to do, and what do I want to do personally? So when it comes to the board, I think the board needs to publish specific strategies and processes for members' engagement, and then document its progress on those specific strategies and processes, and report on that to members. I think that's something that the board owes to the membership. I think there needs to be a space for member engagement, so between members and the board, and even between members themselves. What I've seen at other registries is spaces for workshops, for example, where particular issues can be discussed in detail, and everyone can bring their issues and concerns to the table, and members can even go to the leadership with proposed changes. When it comes to me personally, I would like to use my time on the board to have as many conversations as possible. I think, regardless of how this election turns out, I will have benefited greatly from having so many conversations with members, and it's something I'd like to continue in the future. And I think it's a really important component in finding a way to represent the entire membership and not just my particular background or the people I know.
As Nominet members who know me know, I've always been engaged with members by email, forum, and I'm always available to meet up. Not always, but I'm always available to try to meet up with Nominet members by telephone or in person, or by video call now. I often attend Nominet events, and I meet Nominet members one-to-one when I'm in the UK. So I'm always accessible, and I would keep up my website at davidthornton.uk, so it was an easy point of call to contact me.
I'm already active on Twitter and other social media on Nominet issues, and have been since the time prior to the EGM in March. When I was previously on the board, my door was always open, and it remains open. I'm in a position, I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I can dedicate considerably more time than the 20 to 25 days a year that is advocated in the election pack to Nominet business, and I would happily do so. I would, when it's possible, want to be involved in meetings and lunches and other ways of meeting members, online, social media, direct contact by telephone or email. Any of those and all of those are welcome. Nobody has all of the answers, and it would be foolish not to listen to as many viewpoints as possible from within the membership before carrying out one's duties as a director. So to me, part of the role would be being open and available.
I love this question. It's a great question, because I'm insanely curious about what people want to do, about how they see their businesses improving. I make a joke with friends and colleagues is that I really love lunch. I love sitting down with people and having lunch and understanding not just their businesses, but how their businesses work, for example, in our local Dorset community. Does it matter that we don't have great broadband service here? Does it matter that I've only got 2 bars of signal when I should have 5G? Yes, it really matters to me. But it matters to me in terms of knowing people. I think one of the missteps, just to use the phrase of the chair, has been that in the last little while, the board has seen an opportunity to close down, to become less visible, to become less communicative. And I think that has to stop. At the same time, though, we have to be very clear about the role of a board, and the role of board directors is to act in the best interest of the company as a whole. And that is a balancing act that it's different every day. It's different for every issue. And we need to accept some level of turmoil and tension. But turmoil and tension can be respectful. It can be intellectually driven debate. It can be evidence-based debate, but it can also be enormously collegial. And I do hope that we take the opportunity, once we've come out of these dreadful lockdowns, to get together again. There's opportunities also for Nominet to play a much bigger role on the international stage where we're more visible. It's very important. Nominet's played that role for many, many years and needs to continue to do it. We also have the UK IGF that we can participate in. And there are other roles and opportunities for board members to be available for integration and knowledge building and development. And the knowledge building is key for me, because the board must also continue to learn. The board must be supported by ongoing review and ongoing training, because that's how great board members, even if they're highly experienced people, can actually demonstrate to the organisation that they care about innovation and they care about being focused on the new and the possible, but being grounded in the reality of the present.
Yeah, well, there's been a link to talk to me at the bottom of the public benefit website since I started that movement at the beginning of the year, and it's still there and it's always available. If anyone ever wants to talk to me, they can book in for a one-on-one Zoom session whenever they like. I've published a link to this in the candidate statements, and yeah, I'll make myself available to talk to anyone that wants to talk.
And that's all we have. I'd like to thank all of the candidates for their contributions and wish them well in the upcoming elections. Voting in our elections is a key part of being a member and of Nominet's governance, and I would encourage you to vote. Voting closes on the 15th of November. And finally, a reminder that you have another opportunity to participate in our governance at the AGM planned for the 18th of November. Thank you for watching.